Yes, this is view only. View only. All right. So we often think of the period after the glaciers and before history as one of bison-covered prairies and a few Native Americans living lightly on the land. Is this accurate, and how do we know? Join Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie archaeologist and tribal liaison Joe Wheeler as we dig deeper into the real story of the prairie past in Northeast Illinois. And so with this program, bison and people on the Northeast Illinois Prairie, feel free to message in the chat if you have any questions. And without further ado, Joe Wheeler.
Thank you, Duke, and welcome everyone. And as Duke said, I'm Joe Wheeler of Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture down in southwestern Will County nearby. And we'll talk about bison and people and what I think many folks will find to be a little more complicated story than we usually think of. So who is Midewin, or what is Midewin? Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie takes its name from the Anishinaabe-speaking people, to include the Potawatomi, the last historic people who occupied the land, Native Americans who occupied the land. It's their medicine society, and it deals with societal balance and healing. So we had conferred with the tribes and got permission to use that land as both a tribute and a reflection of what we hope to be is kind of a balance and healing to our lives. So what is Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie? The only National Tallgrass Prairie. It has a perimeter that encloses almost 20,000 acres. And of those 20,000 acres, 18,000 has been turned over to the Forest Service. Of course, it started out as the Joliet Arsenal, for those of you who are of my vintage and maybe just a little bit younger, who remember the Joliet Arsenal as a thing for 56 years or so since the Second World War. First and foremost, we are open and have been open throughout the pandemic. Our lands and trails and trailheads are open. Our Welcome Center is not open to the public yet, unless there's a reason to be there. And of course, we're going to encourage you, if you visit Midewin, to recreate responsibly, avoid it if you're sick. If an area is crowded, find it less occupied with 18,000 some acres, it should be pretty easy to do. And one of the reasons we say to take precautions additionally than the obvious and the spread of COVID-19 is law enforcement or search and rescue. If you get off trail or out in the boonies, may be limited due to the COVID-19 issues. Midewin was established through the Illinois Land Conservation Act of 1995 to manage the land and water resources in a manner that will conserve and enhance native populations of fish, wildlife, and plants. And we quickly realized, as they did the analysis on that direction from the federal law, the way to do that, or the only way to do that, was to in fact restore the prairie. So that is our first and foremost and primary mission. We also provide opportunities for scientific, environmental, and land use education and research. We allow for the continuation of agricultural uses of the lands and provide a variety of other recreational opportunities, which, if we were all in person, I think even still, this is one of what we're doing. This is both a recreational opportunity and environmental education and research. Midewin has 172 species of birds that live or pass through it, 1,000 plus insect species, 570 vascular plants, and lots of non-vascular plants for the mushroom fans out there. And we also have 27 species of mammals, 17 reptiles, 8 or 9 amphibians. We have, as a volunteer opportunity at Midewin, the frog monitoring program. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities. Frog monitoring program, very popular one. And one of the species of frogs was heard but never seen by one of the volunteer frog monitors. So if there's a frog that goes along with that frog call, we have 9 different types of amphibians that live there. 53 fish species on 22 miles of the 4 named streams that run through the prairie. Most of those fish are about as big as your pinky or smaller. Agricultural uses, we run about 1,000 cattle on 4,000 acres of grazing. We have about 4,000 acres that are in row crops, primarily corn and beans. Recreation, we have 34 miles of trails on Midewin. We have 3 hunting seasons. We have biking, cross-country skiing, horseback riding. You have to bring your own horse, but horseback riding and equestrian designated trails and multi-use trails, public recreation and ed programs throughout the year. Here's a picture of, on the left, those couple of pictures, education and research. We have a variety of academic partners with whom we host for research purposes, and that would be everything from carbon sequestration studies to, on the left, you see photos of Professor Mark Scher in the blue jacket, center there with a ground penetrating radar, one of the archaeological sites of Midewin. And then some students from the University of Chicago who are out doing resistivity testing also on the archaeological site. So a lot of that going on too. 14,000 of the 18,000 plus acres are open to the public, 365 days a year from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. We have 2 turkey and 1 deer season per year. We go by Illinois state laws and regulations on that. And in October of 2015, we commenced the bison experiment. Bison experiment, we introduced 27 bison, 3 bulls out of the Yellowstone herd, and 24 cows out of a conservation herd in South Dakota. And since then, they have been going like gangbusters, and it has redoubled my efforts. My little piece of the pie is in historical land use, prehistoric land use, environmental history, as well as the archaeology in the Tribal Liaison and Heritage Program. So we get a lot of questions on the bison, so I thought it only fair that we should look into what's the real story on bison. And speaking of the real story, we all know the real story, right? Most people here are from, I'm guessing, from Illinois, and we were taught in Illinois schools, the glaciers covered the area until the episode ended 10,000 years ago. The retreating glaciers formed the Great Lakes and Georgian Bay. And then the bison and the bird-filled prairies appeared. And the Native Americans came and lived lightly on the land. And then in 1673, in the upper left-hand corner, you see a depiction of Marquette and Joliet's trip up through Illinois and the Des Plaines in 1673, and things started to change very, very quickly. Agricultural uses commenced at the land that's now Midewin in about 1830. That's about the same time as most of the region just started its agricultural development. And of course, the lower left-hand corner, you see John Deere and the self-scouring steel plow there that tore up within a generation all of what had been the Tallgrass Prairie. Locomotives soon crisscrossed the I&M Canal, crisscrossed steam-powered locomotives. Lower right-hand corner is field tile installation, a tiling machine, big industrial field tiling, and the land changed drastically and forever as of about 1830 to 1850. 1940, after about 110 years of agricultural uses, the Army arrived, bought the land from all private ownership and all farms, by the way, with the exception of one business, which was a bar called the Shamrock, owned by the Doyle family. Everything else was a farm or a schoolhouse, and that was it. Well, the Army came and began on the west side, west of Illinois, Route 53. You see in the lower right-hand corner the TNT manufacturing operations, and not visible in that picture, but you can see on the left, they began to build hundreds of bunkers, which were called during the Arsenal era igloos, and in order to store the TNT, ship it to the east side where it was assembled into bombs, landmines, artillery shells, all sorts of TNT blocks, all sorts of munitions. This continued until 1996. In fact, a few subcontracts continued until after that. Some of the old-time Midewin employees remember hearing and seeing the activities of munitions assembly going on for the first couple of years of the Forest Service had much of the land. And today, of course, as everywhere, everything is covered by highways, industrial scale, agriculture, and infrastructure of all types. Thank goodness for the Forest Service, come to the rescue, return the prairie to bison and the birds as it always had been. But as British science writer, academic, and physician Ben Goldacre says, I think you'll find it's a bit more complicated. Somewhat less distinguished, Joe Wheeler says, how so, or show me. So in fact, although the glacier episode did indeed begin about 85,000 years ago, the last glacial episode, the Wisconsin glacial episode, the glaciers began to recede about 25 to 21,000 years ago, and by about 19 to 18,000 years ago, the land that's now Midewin was uncovered from the ice as the glaciers melted back. And when we talk about this depiction or what happened, the history of the land, what I always like to go to, and I have the link up there if you want to take just a minute and grab a pencil and paper if you're interested in paleoecology. Neotoma Paleoecology Database. Data manager is formerly the chief scientist at the Illinois State Museum. He retired but still runs this out of Minnesota State University. And this is the homepage you get. And what is a neotoma, Joe? Well, neotoma is the genus of the 20 different living species of pack rats, because this ingests all sorts of databases relevant to paleoecology and makes them available to anyone who's interested. And one of the really neat things I'm going to show you in a minute is on the upper left-hand side, I put in a yellow button, it's an Explorer. So when you click on Explorer, you get a map page like this. And first you go up to this toolbar next to where it says Neotome Explorer in the kind of upper left, and you click the white dot on that toolbar, which is water and ice coverage. That'll bring up the second window, which says ice and lakes. And then you can pick any one of incremental dates beginning about 20,000 years ago and ending essentially when the land became like it is. This depiction is what Orland Park looked like with the glacier coverage 18,200 years ago. As a kind of a white mask, you can see the outline of Lake Michigan, Chicago. Orland Park is dimly under that star next to the word Orland Park. And then Midewin, you see by 18,200 years ago, Midewin was uncovered from the glacier. The glacier had receded at that point. The databases included in Neotoma include pollen, geology, diatoms, middens, isotopic data, taphonomy, which in paleontological terms, which would be geological terms, is kind of turning prehistoric sharks into stone representations or fossils of prehistoric sharks. For archaeology, it means we use it to mean site formation processes. Peatland, dendrochronology, geochronological modeling, insects, vertebrates, macrobotanicals are things you can see, seeds, twigs, things of that nature, leaves, and then microbotanicals, which would include the pollen and phytoliths and things that you need microscopes to. And finally, ostracods, which are great little things. I didn't keep the slides in here, so I get distracted when I talk about ostracods, which are very, very tiny little crustaceans, each one of the over 1,000 species living like a particular regime of water, temperature, turbidity, chemical composition, and it can tell us a lot when we see them in the record underground, typically, what the environment was like in the past. The second thing, and I'll bore down a little bit, is telenological data or pollen data. And we are lucky here at Midewin in that you'll see a map of Nelson Lake in Batavia and Chatsworth Bog down in Livingston County are about equidistant from Midewin, north and south. And on the right-hand side, you'll see John Schwegman, Illinois State botanist, 1973 map of the natural divisions of Illinois. And although you all in Orland Park are in the northeastern Moreno division, Midewin is on the Grand Prairie division, as are Nelson Lake and Chatsworth Bog. So what is this palynology thing? I know it's the question on everyone's lips right now, so let's answer it. In the upper left, you'll see the pollen on the surface of a pond. You've all seen that on a sunny day, kind of that dust over the surface of the pond. And of course, that stuff sinks. And if you can get it in a fen or a bog or someplace where the water is cold and not very good in oxygen, it tends to preserve. It would be to your feet, the muck between your toes when you're wading into a bog or a fen, or even a lot of what composes the muck at the bottom of a living pond or lake. In the wintertime, they go out and they take core samples. This is Eric Grimm, formerly of Illinois State Museum in Nelson, at Nelson Lake, no relation, taking core samples. And when they split them open, you'll see what a pollen core looks like. And then on the lower right-hand side, you can see that due to the law of superimposition, of course, things that are older sink to the bottom, and things that are newer are higher in this column of the pollen core. Whoops, there we go. And what about that pollen? Well, you might be surprised because it just makes you sneeze. But in addition to making people sneeze with grass and other pollens, each one, when you put them under a microscope, is pretty distinctive, certainly the genus, many times the species. Grasses, as in the upper left, ash, the kind of rectangular pollen, in the lower left, ragweed, very distinctive. You can get to see some ragweeds in that science photo library there. And then oak and the little bipolar spruce, or picea. So we combine those. That is the column, which tells us what is the date on things. And in the study that's listed here, this Nelson, the Influence of Aridity on Fire in Holocene Prairie Communities, we look at that, and they also use fire, so they also use carbon, little carbon layers that fall in between the pollen layers from prairie fires of the past, and they can actively date those or directly date those. So everything below that pollen level is just after the date of the ash, of the carbon, and everything, or just before, everything above it is just after. And they're able to pretty accurately date the pollen, which we can identify, and add those two things, and it tells you what kind of plants were in what abundance, which gives you a very, very good proxy of paleoecology. So 17,700 years ago, we'll move on. Midewin is almost completely uncovered, and unfortunately, if you're from Orland Park, you're still under the ice. But when the glaciers melt back, just to give you an idea how quick this process is, this is a photo of Peterson Glacier in Alaska. And in just 85 years, when glaciers do melt back actively and quickly, as they did in Illinois, you can see that it's gone from full glacial coverage to a green field. And when you're in the shadow of that glacier, the first thing you're going to get is a tundra. And tundras have varying appearances: a stony tundra on the upper right, kettle lakes on the upper left, or just kind of short veg growth in the lower right. By 17,000 years ago, whoa, so the glaciers receded, but due to ice dams, moraines that hold back the meltwater, things of that nature, we have a great lake stretching almost, or to the actually far eastern part of Midewin and Orland Park now. You finally got out of the ice and you're completely under the water. It doesn't last too long, but what we see is, and that previous slide is the twin actions, the Valparaiso lobe of the glaciers, and form Glacial Lake Waponsie and Glacial Lake Morris, and eventually they forced an outlet, the Chicago outlet, on the Des Plaines River, kind of tears through mostly around Lamont, and then we don't hear as much about Lake Waponsie and the Kankakee Torrent, but in fact the Michigan lobe of the glacier drained along roughly St. Joseph, Michigan, South Bend, and then along the Kankakee Basin. And both of those things intersected, and you'll see on the right the red star is where Midewin is. And you can see we have water coming up from the southeast as well as the stuff from the glacier flowing from the northeast. And everything kind of coincided there. On the left-hand side, you can see the Valparaiso moraine holding it back, the Des Plaines River outlet, and the Kankakee being the other big source. So we were washed in two different directions by this glacier. Finally, 16,300 years ago, Orland Park is now waterfront property. So congratulations for your lakefront home. When the tundra, when it warms up a little bit, it's still a cold environment. So the tundra was replaced about 13,000 years ago, at least on Midewin, and all these dates are relatively specific to Midewin, by a boreal forest, mostly spruce in this case. And that was gradually supplanted as the weather grew warmer and a little wetter, and tundras are very dry. About 14,000 years ago, we had an environment that does not exist anymore, and that is black ash and spruce swamps. So that was the time of mammoth and mastodon and giant beavers. And for some reason, as this painting by Simonowski from the Illinois State Museum, also works with the Field Museum, does a lot of illustration. They also find a lot of swan bones in the record from specimens from that area. Normally bird bones don't preserve well, so everyone kind of is puzzling why all the swans, but they're there, so he depicted them. And mammoth and mastodon we see as something that's you know, a wow, a gee whiz, a rare thing that there were mammoth and mastodon here. But in fact, not as rare as you'd think. Chris Widga, now of Tennessee, East Tennessee State University Center for Excellence in Paleontology, did a study in Boreas, which he published just a couple of years ago. He used to work at the Illinois State Museum as a paleontologist, now works down there. And it looks like a fairly narrow window when the mammoth and the mastodon both went extinct throughout the Midwest. And he depicts them both in the years on the bottom axis, and then he shows the pollen and what was most abundant. So spruce, black ash, and oak in respective colors, top to bottom, and gray alder being the red. What was most abundant? Was it a environmental change of some sort? Was it a ecological change on the ground? What caused it? But as I was saying, if you think that's a rare event, the mammoth and mastodon, for his study, late Pleistocene Proboscidean population dynamics in North American mid-continent, if you thought that it was a rare thing, in fact, he found just in the upper Midwest, 659 specimens that he used for radiocarbon dating. So that means he also had to find all the specimens that they did not allow him to do destructive radiocarbon testing on, or specimens which were distinctively mammoth or mastodon and were not suitable for radiocarbon dating. So there's a heck of a lot of sites with mammoth and mastodon bone. And you can see there's surely a heck of a lot in the collar counties and southern Chicago region. And the different colors are, I can't recall which is red and which is blue. One is mammoth, one is mastodon, and the black dots depict both present at one site. Whew, okay. 12,800 years ago, Orland Park and Midewin are both dry. And in fact, the lake level, you can see the dark blue, which is where the lake edge was, that a lot of the lake was not where it is today. In fact, as the glacier receded, melted back to the north, similarly, ice dams, isostatic rebound, a few other things, and moraines and things like that, caused the lake to be less full than it is today. And by 11,500 years ago, we entered what's called the Lake Chippewa phase, where the lake is much, much smaller than we think of Lake Michigan today. And you could, in 11,500 years ago, walk from the lakefront at Waukegan all the way to St. Joseph, Michigan, and just get your feet damp. Between 13,000 roughly and 10,000 years ago, we had people on the land here. And this is upper left-hand corner. You can see a Paleo-Indian projectile point. It was found just a few months ago in Wilmington. And one of the characteristic things of, and I wasn't there to take the picture, so it's in inches. realize it should be in centimeters, but it's in inches. I'll just have to live with that. It breaks my heart. And you can see that this dark kind of chert that it's made out of, and that is not a local chert. And that's kind of characteristic of the earliest people, the Paleo Indians here. We believe were wide-ranging hunting people. 3,000 years or so were out across the land of what's now northeastern Illinois and hunted primarily large game, moving on rather than being sedentary. The environment at the time, warmer and wetter still, had become, or warmer and a little drier, had become ash elm forest, temperate deciduous forest. And that period lasted 4,500 years or so. And that is the period in which people arrived here. So the first people that arrived here didn't arrive to the prairie, they arrived to a hardwood forest. And of course, when they made it to the shore of Lake Michigan, it didn't look anything like it did thousands of years later. The earliest artifact we have on Midewin is what's called a Dalton fluted projectile point. We have just the base of it, the tip is missing, the distal end, as they say, is missing. And why is that important? Why is that so cool that it's making me talk about it? Well, the Dalton Point dates from between about 9,500 to 10,000 years ago. And although it's sort of shaped like a Paleo-Indian projectile point, it's often or most often made of local materials. So what does that say that's different? Well, unlike the Paleo-Indians who got their lithic material from another source and carried it with them because they found some good material and stuck with it. In fact, what you're starting to see is people who are beginning to learn the sources of local material. We believe this is a suggestion that this suggests it's the beginning of sedentism. That is, the first people who lived here full time. So the people, we call it a Dalton Point. That's not a Native American name for it. Certainly, we wouldn't have known if they had a name for it or what the people called themselves. But Dalton Point, what you see in the lower right-hand corner, is probably made by someone who could be called one of the first Illinoisans. 9,500 years ago, the lakes advanced a little bit, but not quite to where it is today. And now we're going to get off on a little bit of a sidetrack on the prairie. So, the Cornfield Fleet. I wish I could see everybody. If we were a live audience, I'd like to see who knows about the Cornfield Fleet. Well, during the Second World War, the Navy converted a couple of what had been Great Lakes passenger steamers to aircraft carriers. And they renamed them the USS Wolverine and the USS Sable. Upper left-hand corner, you'll see the Sable, before it became the Sable, was the Greater Buffalo, launched in the 1920s to work the Great Lakes. On the bottom left, you'll see the two U.S. aircraft carriers, the Wolverine and the Sable, at Navy Pier. That's Navy Pier on the right-hand side of the photo, left. And the Navy wanted to find a place where they did not have to divert other vessels to provide security from U-boats to aircraft carriers that were out there to train pilots. They also had relatively more predictable, slightly better lake conditions than they had ocean conditions in the Atlantic around Norfolk, where they had been training. And sailors and aviation candidates from Glenview Naval Air Station or Great Lakes Naval Air Station began carrier quals in Lake Michigan on these two ships of the Cornfield Fleet. And during the course of the Second World War, 120,000 aircraft carrier landings were done on those two carriers. 35,000 naval aviators were trained, including George Bush, the former president. On the right-hand side, he got his carrier qualifications on the Great Lakes out of the air station here and sailing on the Great Lakes. During the course of that time, 128 aircraft were lost. Of that 128, about 58 have been recovered, about 70 remain lost. Somewhat recently, more recently, the A&T, for Ellen Olson and Taras Lysenko, who formed a company to recover these things. You can see the A&T company, a diver from the A&T company recovering or on one of these sunken World War II carrier planes. And in 1985, when they were in the course of trying to locate these aircraft, they used side scanning sonar. And in that side scanning sonar, they happened to find the sunken forest of Lake Chippewa. So it's called the Olson Tree Site, named after Olson. And this is an approximate location of the Olson Tree Site, or the Ocean Stump Site, or the Lake Chippewa Stump Site, about equidistant north of Gary Harbor and east of Chicago Harbor. And of course, it's not exact, the location that's in this map, because, sure as heck, if somebody knew it was down there, somebody else living in a nice neighborhood would have a coffee table made of 8,300-year-old oak wood. So about 80 feet below the surface, they found 50 stumps, an old forest site. They sampled 3 of them. 2 of them turned out to be oaks and 1 was an ash, and they all date to pretty tightly between 8,300 and 8,100, almost 8,400 and 8,100 years ago. So kind of cool, but also proving the theory of Lake Chippewa and walking from Waukegan to New Buffalo. Another interesting thing of that era, and I'll move on from there, but it does get to, we talk about hunting large mammals. So Proceedings of the National Academy of Science had an article about the same phenomenon in Lake Huron. And the green part of the map in the upper right used to be dry land. Only the brown part is now dry land. And you can see the small site that's here called Drop 45, the Drop 45 locality, about 120 feet below the modern surface of the lake. And they found some wood there, radiocarbon dated that to a little older than the Chippewa, Lake Chippewa site. And they found a 9,000-year-old caribou hunting drive line and so forth. We'll take a look at that. From these pictures, you can see the diagram, and this is the sonar picture of it. And if you can see these, this kind of parallel lines here, which is the drive line for these things. And you can see it on the photo to the right. Probably the kill zone would have been to the southeast, to the right lower part. And there it is, sitting over 100 feet below the surface of modern Lake Huron, as they hunted caribou, not bison. Let's get back to the climate and the prairie, the history of the prairie. As the climate grows warmer and drier, we start to see prairie meadows. That is, the pollen tells us it's still mostly hardwood, but we're starting to see more poaceae, more grasses. Lasts for about 1,000 years, this emergence of poaceae on the hardwood forest of Northeast Illinois. Then a cooler and wetter period happens, lasts about 1,000 years, or I'm sorry, about 500 years. We see less grasses, more tree pollen. 6,300 years ago, the lake is about what it looks like now. It's still getting back to its normal shape. And as of about 6,200 years ago, prairie becomes the dominant ecosystem. So we think of Illinois as the prairie state. That's when it dates to, is about 6,200 years ago. But think about that, if you would, that in fact, we think of the prairie as something that had always been there, but in fact, people had been on that land living permanently for 4,000 years and had been at least passing over this forested land for closer to 7,000 years. And note on the lower right-hand corner, the bison don't arrive until about 4,400 years before present. So the prairie had been there almost 2,000 years before we see the first evidence of bison on the Tallgrass Prairie. But something else did happen. And that other thing that happened was after the trees went away and people found themselves living on a prairie, it took a little while, but something arose called the Eastern Agricultural Complex. And instead of hunting and gathering, it became a hunting, gathering, and horticultural, or perhaps even agricultural lifestyle. The book on the right, the Riverton site is on the Wabash, kind of in southeast Illinois. You can see it in the map in the center. If you want to learn about that and other early Illinois archaeological things, you can go to the Illinois Archaeological Survey website. And then you'll see a tab there for out-of-print publications, and IAS Monograph 1 is Riverton, and it talks about the Riverton site in Illinois, one of the premier Eastern agricultural complex sites in the country. And that green circle is roughly where this Eastern agricultural complex arose. And you'll see we're a little bit out of it, but that line is not impermeable. It's just a line on a map. And there's plenty of evidence here people were dealing with the same horticultural products. They included Chenopodium. Today we would call it goosefoot or lamb's quarters. It is a relative of quinoa. So those of you who love quinoa, you would have had a heyday in the what's called the Archaic era. And there was a subspecies called Berlandiarum, which is no longer extant, but that was what they primarily grew. Of course, sunflowers, as you might guess, bottle gourds, which may in fact date back even longer to about 8,000 years ago. And some people suggest may have come across the land bridge from Asia with some of the very, very earliest people to arrive in the Americas. Also, squash and pumpkins began to be raised. And you can see the marsh elder, although that has a little more southerly range. That's part of the Eastern agricultural complex suite of cultivars. And it takes a lot of seeds. You can see that in the palm of a hand. It takes a lot of seeds to fill up a soup pot with that. Let's get back to bison. This is an engraving from the Gubert site. Gubert site, I don't know how to say it, but Randolph County, down along the Illinois, near the confluence of the Illinois and Mississippi, down in Randolph County. And it's an engraving on a bison bone of a bison. So just kind of a really, really neat picture, although it is from the 1700s, early historic era. So it's not very old, but it's a really neat thing. It's been part of the culture. Bison are part of the culture here and have been for a long, long time. However, the earliest remains of bison we see are from Whitesides County. They found 2 specimens on a floodplain on the east bank of the Mississippi in Whitesides County. And the thought being that we don't really know if those bison lived there, or being as they were in a floodplain, if they died as they often did in the Mississippi River and just washed ashore there. No evidence of people having affected or interacted those 2 bison specimens, and then we don't see any bison there for over 1,500 years before any more bison are found. About 4,400 years ago, 2,000 years after the prairie becomes a dominant system, we start to see bison in small local populations, and there appear to be pulses. We'll look at that more in a second. It's only about the year 1600 and thereafter where we start to get a lot of bison in Illinois. And by a lot, I mean herds in the hundreds versus likely herds in the dozens, let's say. A good book, if you have a chance to find it, it is out at Amazon right now. It's no longer being sold by the State Museum right now, but a couple of places you can get it, either for pay online, or if you're able to get an academia account, you can download it. But Records of Early Bison in Illinois by Bruce McMillan was the editor, and a few of the other big names in zoo archaeology and Holocene paleontology, including Dr. Terry Martin, the Illinois State Museum, are in a good book and gives you the story, the scientific story. This is a baseball statistics. This is not play-by-play here. So you see the prairie on this graph is the white line. You see in the upper left-hand corner of the graph about 8,000 to 9,000 years ago, those 2 isolated specimens from Whitesides County, the Anderson Peat Mine. And then you'll see the absence of anything from prairie to the right until 4,400 years or so ago. And then you'll see that, or you can see from this graph, these are the date ranges from radiocarbon dates. So it's not just a point, but this is the range of dates. If you're familiar with how radiocarbon dates give you a range, not an exact specific date. And you'll see there appear to be about 4 pulses of bison in Illinois. You'll also note on the right-hand side all of the title of these things, all of the title of these radiocarbon dated sites, bison from them. None of them from Cook County or the collar counties. So fortunately, we're about to correct that. We did find that Bamford Farm Site in Minooka, Illinois had about a half dozen bison specimens at what had been a bog or a bog there. And we've submitted those for radiocarbon dates. So stay tuned to Midewin and to Dr. Chris Widga of East Tennessee State University for more news on those. But right now, we only see these 4 little pulses of bison. And we don't start to see a lot of bison until roughly 1600. This suite of Eastern Agricultural Complex cultivars expands. You can add erect knotweed, not the Japanese knotweed if you're a farmer or if you're a gardener and you're trying to get rid of Japanese knotweed, different stuff. This is erect knotweed and it's a native and it has nice seed. It was cultivated. Maygrass, although maygrass is also a little more southerly range and wheat complex. Little barley and amaranth. And amaranth a little bit in dispute, but we're going to throw it in there. You'll also note when you look at that little barley picture, it's growing on just scoured ground. And in fact, virtually all of these species prefer, they're called ruderal species, and they prefer disturbed or waste ground to grow on, such as you would get after a fire or a flood or fire and flood. And that of course raises the question of people and fire. Because we start to see a lot of fire influence in the record, the ecological record, but probably more than we would expect from just lightning strikes. And it seems to be pretty widespread. One example of people using fire or anthropogenic fire is quoted in Markman's title, Chicago Before History, Prehistoric Archaeology of a Modern Metropolis by Charles Markman. And he quotes, I think, Perrault, but it's also recounted in Joliet and LaSalle's 17th century reports on Native Americans assembling in great numbers, setting fire to the grass except for the passageway. And they station themselves at the passageway, and when the bison come out, they're compelled to pass by the Native Americans, who sometimes kill up to 200 in a single day. So controlled use of fire. About 4,000 years ago, another great picture here by, as the previous one was, George Catlin, also from the National Gallery of Art, picked a much later period when Native Americans got the horse. And about 4,000 years ago, the moisture increased, temperature dropped, and the forest should have returned, but it didn't. So a lot of people, it's almost reaching a tipping point where getting to be generally accepted that the tallgrass prairie and the keeping it tallgrass prairie was a result of, or certainly significantly influenced by anthropogenic fire. And fire had become a versatile tool for preparing the ground for those rural species that were being cultivated, for hunting, and even for maintaining the ecotones themselves, that is, the spaces between riparian areas, dry prairie, woodlands, things where there's a lot of different resources available to you. If you can maintain those ecotones, fire is a good way to do it. On Midewin itself, evidence of bison. We have on the left-hand side, and since I put this together, I haven't got a picture of it to share with you yet, but we do have a Bison Scapula Hoe. When I had this a little earlier, it was a fragment. It was the spine of a bison scapula with tool marks on the base of it and on the other edge of it, showing that it had been sliced off of a bison scapula. And this part fits where this would be the spine, the shoulder blade of a bison. And on the right, you see Buffalo Bird Woman, who was a Hidatsa woman, lived for almost 100 years and maintained knowledge of the old lifeways, the old survival techniques, agricultural techniques. And you can see the picture of her digging with a scapula hoe when a lot of her wisdom, a lot of her knowledge was recorded by in North Dakota when she was living there in her old age before that knowledge was lost. And one of the other things at a site in Midewin was called the Middle Grant Creek site. It dates to about the year 1600. but we have Bison Scapula or Bison Scapula fragment there. We also have one heck of a lot of little corn cobs, CMA's cobs from this site. So clearly people needed hoes because they were growing one heck of a lot of corn on that site. The other thing we see, in addition to scapulas, in northeastern Illinois, in the Chicagoland region, are foot bones. First phalanx, second phalanx, third phalanx. We found all parts of that at this Middle Grant Creek site. You can see a specimen of a first phalanx here on the top, and one of the same bone from the Illinois State Museum comparative collection, and then second phalanx just below it, the articulating portion from Midewin site on the top, and from the Illinois State comparative collection on the bottom. Why? Why is that? Well, a couple of things we'll talk about. First is a picture of some young men in Southeast Asia, and they're carrying a pig. And maybe that's analogous in the days of Native Americans here, in the days before horses and without wheels. How do you carry, bison from wherever you got it? A bison, unlike a deer at Midewin at the archaeological site, we find a lot of all elements of deer skeletons. That is to say, there's ribs and skulls and all kinds of things that they carry back because they're small enough to carry back. Bison, we just find scapulas and foot bones. So you can see, looking at how these guys are carrying the pig, how useful it would be if that's how you're carrying a bison carcass, to leave those foot bones on the hide. So we think that perhaps, so you didn't have to carry what averaged to be an 1,100-pound bison on the hoof, and most adult bison are females that survive, and they run about 1,100 pounds on the hoof. When you dress out the carcass, gives you about 616 pounds of meat, and one assumes that when they were initially hunted, they also would have, people who hunted them would have feasted immediately on site on tongues, humps, and livers, the delicacy parts. So you're probably looking at a little less than 616 pounds of dressed bison meat to bring home, wherever you took it. That averages out to almost 250,000 calories per bison. But you can dry it or smoke it and reduce that weight to 20 or 30% of the original. So you wind up with about 116 pounds of meat and about 16.5 pounds. It ranges to how much the hide is prepared, ranges ways. So total carrying weight of about 132 pounds. And we think that, so you didn't have to carry all of the other stuff back that you didn't need. You need the hide, so you skin it. Some group of people working to skin the hide immediately. Others are butchering. Others are smoking and drying the meat, which they then place back into the hide, which has the foot bones still intact. Of course, they're throwing the scapulas in because those are valuable for use in agricultural context, and you carry it home. We don't know where they hunted the bison. All we know is at the local sites, most of the time, we only find foot bones and scapula. There are exceptions right at the confluence of the Illinois, Kankakee and Des Plaines River on the North Shore is an old, early historic site, Potawatomi site, and it has all elements. So it looks like they'll certainly opportunistically kill and butcher bison if they're available. There's a couple of other skeletal elements a little further up the near Sagadansky Slough at an archaeological site has a couple of other skeletal elements, but they're primarily pretty limited. So we talked a little bit about bison. We talked a little bit about people. We talked a lot about prairie and the history of the prairie. And I hope we talked about a few things that you maybe were not expecting to see. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, I'll read them aloud too as we get them.
this is the greatest talk I've ever given. If no one
I
has,
thought it was pretty great. I
no
wrote
one has asked any questions. So,
I wrote a couple things down actually too. Um,
uh,
well,
Mr. Potash has a question there,
oh,
or a raised hand,
oh, we do have a raised hand. Um,
as does is Arcos.
okay, okay. So we'll start with Larry Potash. If you would like to put in the Q&A, we can certainly read your question.
Okay. I do not see the question. Can you read that to me, Duke?
Still no question has been put in the,
Oh, okay.
still waiting, but we can go with Larry first. So Larry, if you'd like, oh, here we go. I'm not an archaeology student, obviously. Are you saying not much evidence or buffalo because Indians used as much as possible?
We think that there's not much evidence because there may not have been, there is no evidence. I guess we'll go to the positive. You know, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, right? So we're assuming that if there's just no evidence, there were a lot of bison historically, and certainly people got here before the bison in the far northeast Illinois region. The only evidence we see of bison, for the most part, in northeast Illinois is at archaeological sites that tend to be pretty late, just within the past 400 years or so. There are a few isolated specimens that probably predate that, but it seems, yes, there were bison, they just were not very plentiful until about the year 1600. Could have been due to Native American population plunges as a result of European diseases having been introduced, which caused population pressures out on the Grand Prairie, the shortgrass prairies, to the population of bison expanding into those tens of millions of herds that we all hear so much about, and kind of forcing them into a wider range than they had been. Could have been climatic, coming off the end of the Little Ice Age, which we find bison more on the shortgrass prairies, which is cool weather grasses. And we may have had more of the type of vegetation they prefer around that time, which would have kind of drawn them in with a preferential food at the time. So no evidence they're not there, but we don't have any evidence that they are there in great numbers.
Okay, the next question from Elaine. Bison that appeared 4,500 years ago, bison as we know them today, or bison latifrons?
No latifrons, no antiquus. All the bison specimens in Illinois are bison or modern bison. And I came here from Wyoming, and we have all kinds of earlier bison species that no longer exist. But out here in the Prairie State, we just have bison.
From Jim, is there a place where we can find the sites and websites you mentioned to explore?
Yeah, which if you want to tell me, I'll just go back to that. I'll share my screen again, and we'll let you get the website. So if you type in again and tell me which site you're interested in, we can get you that information.
Okay. And then Larry again said,
Yes.
when you said 650 mastodon in Midwest, did you mean individual animals or bone/fossil specimens?
What appears to be individual specimens from individual animals. That is to say, there's a lot of bones. Just at that Bamford Farm site in Minooka, there are a number of mammoth and mastodon individuals. So when Chris Widga took that test or tested those specimens, he took not multiple bones from the same specimen. So if you had a site with a mammoth and a mastodon, you would either take it from one from each, or if you had multiple specimens, he would find what's called minimum number of individuals, and he would sample to make sure he had different individuals and got unique dates unique to that individual animal.
Jim said it was tough to choose. All of it was interesting. So as far as sharing your screen goes, I think he'll be
Okay.
interested in a bunch of it.
If anyone, let me just read this off, or can we type in a comment there, Duke?
Oh, yes, yes. So you
Help
can,
me out.
yeah, you
Okay,
can do it.
my email address is joseph.wheeler@usda.gov. And if you think about it, if there's anything you want more information on, I'd be happy to connect you with the sources, resources, okay? So no pressure. Just
There
shoot
we
me
go.
an email at your convenience.
That should have been sent to everyone. Okay. And if somebody didn't get it, let me know.
Okay, other questions, Duke?
Not any right now. So
Okay.
if we can get a last call for questions. We have a good 5 minutes left. So if anybody has any more questions about his presentation, feel free to put in the Q&A. Oh. Why bring back bison to the area now? And that's from Jim.
Right. There is a bison were native to the area. Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie USDA was in charge to restore the tallgrass prairie to enhance species, and we're trying to reintroduce species, and particularly bison, even though they may not have been, what I call the Tatanka fantasy, the dances with wolves fantasy, where they darken the landscape. They were in fact native to this environment in the past. When it was tallgrass prairie, we're taking it back to tallgrass prairie, and my colleague Kelly Gutnick, who's the bison herd manager and our grazing specialist, manages that program to reintroduce them and determine what the effects are in our restoration efforts at Midewin with it reintroducing bison. And also put in a plug that as the tribal liaison, the excess bison, so that if you can imagine, we have to excess some of the bison, and we try to get as many as we can back through the aegis of the Intertribal Buffalo Council out of Rapid City, South Dakota, which has numerous tribal partners that form this organization. We try and get them to them for redistribution back to the tribes who are trying to start their own herds. In some cases, for just trying to reconnect the land and make that a part of their environment on the reservations, something that hasn't been available to them for 150 years or so. So it's a good effort. It's a neat project. We have a lot of partners very enthusiastic who help fund that endeavor. And Joe Wheeler, personal opinion, it's a good thing to do.
So from Ron, we have, what did the Mississippi River look like pre-modernization? Depth, were there rapids? Would it have been easy for bison to cross?
Ron, the first two questions, the first two questions, or three questions, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to. I guess we can find that out, but I personally do not know the answer. Would it have been easy for bison to cross? The record I have of bison, or I understand from bison and the Mississippi, are that in the late 1700s, during a bitterly cold winter, thousands of bison perished trying to swim across the Mississippi River. That in the spring, the shores were full of dead bison. So I would guess it would depend on time of year and water conditions on the Mississippi, whether it would have been easy for them to cross. But it was certainly could be a deadly endeavor for bison.
From Janice, are there any endangered plant species growing in the prairie?
Oh, what a great question. There are there are several threatened and endangered species of plants that are on Midewin National Tallgrass Prairie. My colleague, Michelle Perion, is the botanist, and her colleague, or my other colleague, Jen Durkin, is the native plant specialist. And what I do with archaeological cultural resources, they do with plants to include the endangered species. If you would call or email to Veronica Hinke, and that would be Veronica, spelled as you would think, .HINKE at USDA.gov. Duke, can you help me out there?
Yes, one more time for me.
Veronica .HINKE at USDA.gov, and she can connect you with the references or the experts that are there. And Veronica is our public affairs officer, and she's kind of the traffic cop for all questions that get into the right person to help answer. So I'm not the expert. Long way to say I'm not the expert to answer your question, Janice. 801, Duke.
801. Well, I mean, are you open for a couple more questions if there are any?
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Well, then we'll keep it open. Are there any one or two final questions? If not, let's see. Oh, Janet said just thanks for all the valuable info.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for sticking with us here to 801. Appreciate it. Always glad to have everyone here. I see a few familiar names who I know their way to the prairie. Those who haven't been to Midewin, come on out and visit a prairie. Good place to get out in the open during these times when everybody's social distancing. There's 14,000 acres on which you can distance and also enjoy your public land.
Yes. One of our last questions here from Elaine. Young in here, what is the arsenal you were talking about in the beginning?
Right. Elaine, what was called the Joliet Arsenal were two manufacturing plants for explosives and then assembly for munition. It was two separate endeavors. Later, during the 1950s, the name was changed to the Joliet Arsenal. They were consolidated, and the Army got all this land, acquired all this land just before the beginning of, World War II, for a munitions plant. That operated for 56 years until the land was transferred because of newer technologies and so forth. Not the way you manufactured explosives anymore. The Joliet Arsenal land was for the most part transferred to the Forest Service for the establishment of Midewin, but also the Abraham Lincoln Veterans Administration National Cemetery, Center Point Intermodal Facility. There's a landfill on the south side, another industrial park. There's a number of people got smaller slices of that land, but the Joliet Arsenal is kind of where a lot of things in southwest Will County that are there today, that land had been when the Army bought 34,000 acres of land in 1940.
Wow.
Is that, we good? Make sure I answered your question. Okay. Okay.
All right, perfect. Did you read her response, or do you want me to?
In from that Creek. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. And you had some similar plants in Ohio during the Second World War.
All right.
Government-owned contractor-operated munitions plants during the war. So good. Well, I'm glad to hear. I'm glad you logged in. Welcome from Ohio. Welcome, Elaine. Buckeyes are welcome.
Well, I mean, if there aren't any more questions, I want to thank the Orland Park Library and myself would like to thank Joe Wheeler for doing this presentation with us. And Joe, stick around and I will, keep you so that I can, we can discuss. But thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we appreciate you attending.
And thank you, Orland Park. Appreciate your hosting us. And I think Veronica and Pinky, our public affairs officer, and I both say thanks to you and everyone who attended, including
Absolutely.
Cindy Benson from New Mexico. Good night.